Hello again. I have started something new, so another review should be on the way, but for now I'm going to continue to go back through the shows that I've already seen but haven't yet reviewed. In this case, it's a show that you've probably heard of, if not seen yourself. Ouran High School Host Club is about a girl named Haruhi Fujioka. The series starts right after she's won a scholarship placement at Ouran Academy, a private school for extremely rich kids. It is noted very early on that the students here appear to go to school for fun more than anything else, so she's looking for a quiet place to study when she accidentally walks into the room of the host club, a group of 6 unreasonably handsome boys who spend their free time entertaining the female students. Haruhi accidentally breaks a vase that costs a ridiculous amount of money. As she can't even afford the school uniform, it's obvious she can't pay for the vase. So the host club has her do various errands and eventually try her hand at hosting in order to pay off her debt. The only problem? With her scruffy attire and messy haircut, they think she's a boy. The first episode is interesting as you get to see each host find out that their new apprentice is actually a she. When her true gender is revealed, it really doesn't cause as much of a problem as one would originally think. Haruhi was popular with the girls and she still has a debt to pay, so she agrees to pretend to be a boy and stay on as a host, and thus you have our story. However, the appeal with this show, for me at least, was not with the plot so much as it was with the character analysis. Each character has their own personality and backstory, and among the main cast, everyone has their own place in the story. Of the 7 hosts, I don't feel like anyone is there just to be there, which is usually a plus. There's Tamaki, the charming leader, who brought the club together. Some of the things that come out of his mouth are ridiculous, but he says everything he does because he wants to make these girls happy. He uses the other hosts as a sort of stand-in family to make up for his own broken home life. There's Kiyoya, who's sort of cold and calculating and keeps the club together financially. Successfully maintaining the host club is kind of like his pride, as he grew up the youngest of 4, constantly feeling the need to prove himself when so many expect him to fail. There isn't really much to Mori's character, but I don't see him as being an exception to not fitting in, because he does have his place. There isn't much to his character other than how much he cares about Honey. And Honey's in that role where he slowly has to decide to be himself even though his family doesn't approve. Personally, I think the twins have some of the best moments. The host club is really Hikaru and Kaoru's first experience with friends. Up until this point, they basically lived in a bubble that encompassed no one but each other. As the show goes on, you see them struggling to be individual people as opposed to just one, the Hitachiin twins. To be honest, the only character where I felt something was missing was with Haruhi, our heroine. I loved her dry sense of humor and her immunity to all the craziness that allowed her to deal with the hosts, but the whole concept of her character is that she's an honor student who can only attend Ouran because of her grades. However, Haruhi is arguably the most naive host of the group. Now here's the predictability factor. She's the only girl in a group of boys. One of them, at least, is bound to fall in love with her, right? She goes on a date with one of them and doesn't catch on. And past her attempting to study in the first episode, you never see Haruhi doing anything school-related. Which brings me to something only a little off-topic. I don't think this concept would work if they weren't rich kids in a rich school. If this was set in a regular school, they would have to actually worry about exams and things. The majority of the students in Ouran are probably going to end up living off of their parents' money and success. But making them rich kids also gives the idea of the host club a classier feel. It makes it believable that Tamaki is a genuinely good person who isn't trying to take advantage of these girls. Now, here's where I feel that a lot of people are hesitant about Ouran. Firstly, when I first saw it, a friend had recommended it to me, and I was only like 13. So, when I watched Ouran, yes, the idea of the hosts all kind of just reenacting their fangirls' fantasies, and I hesitate even to use that word, definitely seemed like something I didn't want to get caught watching when my parents were around. But I feel like Ouran gets a bad reputation for being perverted, only because it's so popular and a lot of younger people are watching it and have access to it. If you take it at its most basic, it does seem like a sort of risque idea. But as I grew up and started to explore the anime world a little, I guess, and I found other shows like Air Gear and Sekirei, I realized that Ouran was incredibly clean and tame. I mean, the idea with all the fangirls grouping around these boys to be entertained, the show kind of does revolve around fan service, but not in the sort of fan service that you see a lot of times where, like, their clothes are falling off. So, basically, I feel like Ouran gets a dirty reputation that they didn't really earn. However, there is one thing that I would like to go into. There is not a lot that bothers me in anime. I can take hentai and harems and yaoi and yuri, and none of that really, like, creeps me out. I'm open to a lot of things, and even if I don't necessarily like something, it won't stop me from watching it. However, there are two things that I have pinpointed that I don't like all the time. These two things being a student-teacher relationship and incest, both of which I kinda just find creepy. No offense, of course, to anybody who's into that sort of thing, that's just my opinion. However, Ouran houses the one exception, I guess, with the twins. The twins' main act for their girls is that they're in love with each other. They're all over each other, and apparently these girls find it incredibly hot to find two identical guys alluding to having a sexual relationship when they're not in the eye of the public. Now, for me, this is the exception that isn't really an exception, because, I mean, if it was real, hey, whatever floats your boat, but I'm not into that sort of thing. But because it's just an act, it doesn't bother me. I like the twins' relationship, because they obviously do care about each other an awful lot, but as brothers, not as lovers. And that's kind of where the line is drawn. And because it's a fake relationship, it doesn't bother me. I don't really count it as incest. So there's the exception that is not truly an exception. Anyway, getting back on track, with 26 episodes, I feel like Ouran is the perfect length. There's enough time to get to know all of the characters and for the plot to happen. Like, and here's the real spoiler, at the end you find out that Tamaki's future is in question because he's the school chairman's illegitimate son. He's the only heir, but his grandmother doesn't approve, so he may not inherit anything. When the big conflict comes to a head and it looks like the host club might break up, you feel for all of the characters. You see what the host club has done for all of them, and that Tamaki has succeeded in creating a little family out of them. So I watched Ouran in the English version, and I thought it was excellent. I usually pick a voice highlight, but I really don't think I could pick one that shined out over the others. They all sounded good. I particularly liked the twins, voiced by Todd Haberkorn and Greg Ayres, because their voices were distinctive enough to be able to tell them apart, but they blended really well whenever the two spoke in unison. I've read some, not all of the manga. I don't want to say too much here because I might end up doing a separate review, but if you're already into Ouran and haven't, I would suggest reading the manga. It does go on a little longer, and I feel like it does add to the characters. So overall, I was a little surprised at how much I enjoyed Ouran. The plot was a little too shoujo for my tastes, but the characters really saved this one. So I would suggest watching this and watching it in English. Even if it's not the type of thing you're usually into, you may be surprised. Thank you for watching.